Presidio County was the kind of place people drove through with the windows rolled up and the radio loud. A quiet desert town, sun-bleached and slow-moving, where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. But the silence that draped itself over the place had weight. History clung to the edges of abandoned farmhouses, and the wind carried stories no one dared repeat. Detective Simon Reyes stood at the edge of a remote property line off Chinat Mountain Road, boots crunching over dry brush. The sun had barely begun to climb the sky, the desert bathed in a burnt orange haze. He stared at the object in question. An old wooden outhouse, lopsided, leaning like it had been trying to fall over for years but somehow couldn't commit. The call had come in just after dawn. A county survey crew had stumbled upon the forgotten structure while charting new land boundaries. One of the workers opened the creaking door to find something far more disturbing than an old seat and cobwebs. Now crime scene tape fluttered in the wind and forensics techs buzzed around like ants on a sugar spill. Simon exhaled and walked toward the door, ducking under the tape. His partner, Detective Cara Dupont, stood just outside, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon. "You ready?" she asked. "Not even close," Simon replied. Inside, the air was stale and claustrophobic. A single beam of light cut through a hole in the roof, illuminating the dark interior. Beneath the rotted floorboards, the team had uncovered a shallow cavity containing decomposed remains, wrapped in what looked like a black sheriff's issue jacket. Simon crouched beside the remains as the forensic examiner, Dr. Klein, lifted a corner of the jacket with gloved hands. "Initial guess is male," she said. "Mid-40s at the time of death. Bullet wound to the sternum, point blank. Definitely homicide. Probably been here a decade or more, judging by decomposition and insect activity." Simon stared at the badge still pinned to the jacket, tarnished but unmistakable. "Number 1287, he murmured. His heart sank. "That's Sheriff Holbrook's badge." Dupont stepped inside and froze when she heard the name. "Holbrook? Are you sure?" Simon nodded. "No doubt about it. 16 years ago, Sheriff Raymond Holbrook and Deputy Laya Ortega had vanished during a routine night patrol. Their cruiser was found the next morning on the edge of county jurisdiction. Engine off, doors unlocked, emergency radio untouched. No signs of a struggle, no leads, no suspects, no bodies. Just gone. The case had haunted the Presidio County Sheriff's Department for over a decade. Some had whispered that Holbrook had run off with Ortega. Others claimed it was cartel-related. A few believed they'd simply been murdered and buried in the desert, lost to the elements. Now, at least part of the mystery had a face and a corpse. Simon emerged from the outhouse and pulled off his gloves, wiping sweat from his brow. "This changes everything," Dupont said quietly. "If that's Holbrook in there, then Ortega's story. It wasn't just some runaway romance." Simon nodded. "We've been chasing ghosts. Maybe now they'll start talking." They rode in silence back to the station, the hum of the cruiser almost comforting. Simon's thoughts raced, pulling at old threads, connecting dots that had once led nowhere. Back in 2009, he had still been a rookie, fresh from the academy, idealistic and eager. The disappearance of 2 officers in one night had shattered whatever illusions he'd had about clean justice. After the press frenzy died down and the case turned cold, he'd buried it along with the rest of the department. It was too big, too murky. But now it was back. In the station's evidence room, Simon dug through the cold case files, yellowing papers, faded photographs, testimony from half-truths and speculation. He stopped at a grainy image of Deputy Laya Ortega, smiling in uniform, standing beside Holbrook near their cruiser. She couldn't have been more than 25. Fresh-faced, sharp-eyed. She'd wanted to join narcotics. She'd had plans. He moved to the interrogation room, where Dupont was already pinning a map of Presidio County to a corkboard, marking locations tied to the original investigation. She drew a red X where the outhouse had been discovered. "We need to revisit everyone from the original file," she said, starting with Trish Maroro and Debbie Carr. "They were the last to see Holbrook and Ortega alive," Simon agreed. "Back then, their statements seemed consistent, but with new evidence, they need to talk to us, now." They pulled up records, Both women were still on the force, though Trish had taken a desk job recently, citing stress. Debbie was part of the K9 unit, stationed on the east side. Simon dialed Debbie's number, straight to voicemail. He tried again, still nothing. "Try Trish," DuPont said, her voice tightening. Same result. Voicemail. Simon's instincts flared. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Reyes. I need you to run a background check on 59 Cedar Avenue. It was the last known address connected to the Holbrook case. See who owns it now." A beat later, dispatch came back. "Copy. Property last registered to Miguel Vasquez in 1985. Records after 1991 are incomplete. Current resident listed as Juan Delgado. Moved in 3 months ago." Simon frowned. "Recent, too recent. And the house number used to be 59, now it's 47, DuPont asked. "Classic renumbering to dodge searches. That's a flag." Simon was already heading to the car. "We're checking on Trish first. She lives 6 blocks from here. Let's hope we're not too late." The drive to Sage Street was short, but Simon's mind was racing. The neighborhood was quiet, early morning shadows stretching across driveways. When they pulled up to Trish's small adobe house, something immediately felt off. The porch light was on. The front door was slightly ajar. DuPont stepped out first. "Doors ajar," she confirmed. They approached slowly, hands on their holstered weapons. Simon called out, "Deputy Maroro? It's Detective Reyes. Everything all right?" Silence. He pushed the door open wider with his flashlight. Dark stains glistened on the tile floor of the entryway. Blood. Simon grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, we have a possible crime scene at 312 Sage Street. Blood visible, requesting backup and forensics immediately." They moved inside, weapons drawn. Each room was cleared methodically. Living room, empty, but a lamp was knocked over. Kitchen, normal clutter, but undisturbed. Then the hallway, lined with framed photos of Trish and a boy, likely her son. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom. The bedding was twisted, stained. The sliding glass door to the backyard stood open. Trish was gone. "She fought," DuPont said, eyes scanning the room. "Didn't go quietly." Simon's pulse pounded. He called both Debbie and Trish again. Nothing but voicemail. The backup units arrived quickly. Forensics began processing the blood evidence. Simon stood in the living room, looking at Trish's family photos. "This connects to this morning," he said. "Holbrook's body is found, and now the 2 deputies who testified against him vanish on the same day." DuPont's eyes narrowed. "The bartender? From the Dusty Spur. You said he was acting nervous." Simon nodded slowly, the memory returning. He was whispering to truckers at the corner table. He kept glancing at me. "We need to get back to that bar." Simon grabbed his radio. "Dispatch Reyes. Immediate bolo. Road closures at all town exits. No trucks are to leave Presidio. Repeat, no trucks, commercial or otherwise, are to leave until further notice." "Copy," came dispatch. "Checkpoints being established." Simon turned to DuPont. "If those truckers have Debbie and Trish, we don't have much time." "The Dusty Spur," she said, and they ran. The Dusty Spur was still open when Simon and DuPont arrived, their cruiser cutting through the darkness with flashing red and blue lights. The parking lot was half full, pickup trucks and a few semi-rigs lined up under flickering street lamps. The bar's neon sign buzzed faintly in the dry desert air. Through the grimy windows, Simon could see heads turning, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Their presence was unexpected, unwelcome. Simon killed the siren and turned to DuPont. "Be ready. Something tells me this won't be as simple as asking a few questions." "No such thing as simple in Presidio," DuPont muttered, stepping out. They entered the bar, the door creaking as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, and tension. A slow Willie Nelson tune drifted from the jukebox, suddenly out of place. The chatter had stopped. Dozens of eyes were on them, most wary, a few openly hostile. The bartender, young, wiry, and trying very hard to look busy, froze when he saw them. Simon locked eyes with him. "Carlos, we need to talk." Carlos flinched, pretending to wipe down a glass that didn't need it. "About what?" You were the last person seen talking to a group of truckers, same ones who left right after I did earlier. Now 2 deputies are missing. You want to do this in front of all your regulars or somewhere private? Carlos glanced around the bar. A few men near the back exit shifted in their seats, tense, maybe thinking of bolting. One of them stared hard at DuPont's badge, then looked away quickly. Carlos nodded reluctantly. There's an office in the back. They followed him through a narrow hallway, past the restrooms and into a small, cluttered office. The door barely shut behind them when DuPont stepped in front of it, arms crossed. Carlos stood behind his desk, clearly uncomfortable. The office reeked of stale beer and old cigarette smoke. Metal cabinets overflowed with crumpled receipts and scattered paperwork. Simon leaned against the edge of the desk. "What's your name?" "Carlos Mendoza." "Okay, Carlos, here's where we are. We're investigating the disappearances of 2 officers, Debbie Carr and Trish Mororo. We believe they may have been taken by men connected to organized trafficking. You were seen speaking with those men. You've got a choice to make." Carlos held up his hands. "Look, I just pour drinks. I don't ask questions. I don't know anything about—" "Wrong answer," DuPont cut in, stepping forward. "Not asking questions when you know crimes are being committed makes you an accessory. But helping us? That makes you a witness. Big difference." Simon's voice stayed calm, but his words were sharp. "You were working as a lookout, Carlos. We're not stupid. You signaled someone the moment I walked in earlier. That's obstruction of justice. If those women die—" "I didn't hurt anybody," Carlos snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. I tell them when someone official shows up, that's it. They pay me." "Who are they?" Simon asked, pressing. Carlos looked down. "They're not regular truckers. They come from across the border, from Ojinaga. Always different rigs, but same group of guys. I don't know their real names, but they call themselves Los Transportistas, the transporters." Simon's jaw tightened. "What do they move?" Carlos hesitated. "Talk," DuPont ordered. "Drugs, mostly, at least that's what everyone says. But I've seen girls. Young. Some scared. Some looked out of it. High, maybe. Not prostitutes, not willingly." Simon exchanged a look with DuPont. "American girls?" Carlos nodded. "Sometimes. I don't ask questions. You think I can stop them? You think the cops in this town don't know? Some of them get paid to look the other way." That hit Simon harder than he expected. Of course, he'd suspected corruption before, but this was worse. It wasn't just missed clues or ignored tips. This was willful silence. People choosing to let others disappear. "We're not like the others," Simon said firmly. "You give us names, routes, schedules, anything, and we can shut this down." Carlos swallowed hard. "I only know they come in Tuesday nights. Tonight's their run. Same truck I saw earlier. I saw them leave right before you got here, headed east, maybe to the border." Simon stood up. "You're coming with us. We'll get you to the station, take your statement, and show you photos to ID these guys." Carlos paled. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends on how helpful you are," DuPont said coldly. "Cooperate, and you walk out of this a witness. Lie to us, and we'll make sure you're the first name on the indictment." They escorted Carlos out through the bar. Most patrons avoided eye contact. A few had already left. 2 uniformed officers met them at the door to take Carlos to the station. Outside, the desert air was cooler, the sky beginning to deepen from black to indigo. Simon didn't waste a second. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, Reyes. I want Border Patrol reviewing crossing footage from the last 2 hours. Look for any commercial rigs, particularly freightliners, crossing south. I need descriptions, plate numbers, anything." "Copy, Detective. Reaching out to federal partners now. Also, connect me to the DEA and FBI field offices. We have possible trafficking across the border involving American citizens. I need international coordination. Now." Beside him, DuPont was already on the phone with the Presidio Ojinaga border checkpoint. "Supervisor says they saw a freightliner with Mexican plates cross at 11:02. That's 8 minutes before our bolo went out." "Son of a," Simon muttered. "They beat the lockdown. If they've got Debbie and Trish, they're already over the bridge." Then we follow, DuPont said, snapping her phone shut. 15 minutes later, their cruiser tore down the highway toward the Presidio Ojinaga International Bridge. Sirens silent, speed near red line. Behind them, a convoy was forming. Black FBI SUVs, DEA vans, and a few marked Border Patrol units all racing to join them. This was no longer just a local case. This was federal, international, urgent. At the bridge, floodlights cast stark shadows across the road. Border agents had increased screening per Simon's earlier request. One of them met Simon at the checkpoint with a tablet. We reviewed the camera footage. Mexican-plated freightliner, registered to a fake shipping company out of Ojinaga, crossed at 11:02. That's your truck. Simon scrolled through the stills, blurry images of a semi with a dull white trailer, barely distinguishable drivers. But one figure in the passenger seat. A woman, slumped. It could have been anyone. It could have been Debbie. What's the protocol for pursuit into Mexico? Simon asked. We're already coordinating with Mexican Federal Police, the agent replied. Under the bilateral case initiative, you'll have permission to observe and assist. We've got a contact waiting on the other side. DuPont and Simon exchanged a look. No time to waste. They crossed the bridge in a convoy of red and blue flashes. The Rio Grande glinted below them, a quiet black ribbon beneath the chaos. As they passed into Mexican territory, Simon felt the weight of jurisdiction shift. Here they were guests. Here cooperation would be their only currency. Waiting just beyond the customs station was a line of Mexican Federal Police vehicles. A man with graying temples stepped forward. He wore the insignia of a commanding officer and had the steady demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. I am Capitan Roberto Hernandez, he said in clear English. We have been tracking the truck. It is currently parked at a known location in Zona Rosa district, Calle Revolucion. You are here just in time. We move now. Simon nodded. Let's find our people. And the convoy roared to life again, pushing deeper into the night and closer to answers long buried in the desert. The convoy wound through the streets of Ojinaga, headlights slicing through shadows. The city was smaller than Presidio, but felt denser. Narrower roads, buildings packed tight, the occasional dog barking from a rooftop. As they entered the Zona Rosa district, the tone shifted. Neon signs bathed the street in garish reds, greens, and pinks. Music spilled from doorways, the smell of alcohol, sweat, and something darker hung in the air. Calle Revolucion was a short, straight road lined with nightclubs, massage parlors, and brothels pretending to be bars. There, beneath a flickering neon rose sign, sat the truck. A white freightliner, dull and dusty, parked outside a two-story building painted in an almost offensively bright pink. Its trailer was closed, no visible markings, but Simon recognized it instantly from the border footage. Capitan Hernandez pointed. La Rosa de Fuego, the Rose of Fire, known cartel front. We've been surveilling it for months. Trafficking, drugs, arms, it's all moved through here. Until now, we didn't have jurisdiction to go in. Simon tightened his jaw. You do now. Hernandez turned to his officers. Equipos 2 y 3, flanquen la parte trasera. Nadie sale. Two teams peeled off silently, slipping down side alleys. DEA agents checked their gear. FBI operatives whispered into radios. Simon and DuPont readied their weapons. This is it, DuPont said under her breath. Simon nodded. Let's move. With a final nod from Hernandez, the team surged forward. Policía Federal, todos al suelo. The front doors burst open, the raid kicking off with thunderous force. Screams erupted inside as men scattered and furniture crashed. Officers surged into the bar, weapons drawn. The scent of alcohol and sweat was quickly overwhelmed by the stink of fear. Simon and DuPont pushed through the chaos, clearing rooms as they went. The ground floor was a maze of low lights, velvet curtains, and rooms that looked like set pieces from a bad dream. Some women screamed and fled, others stared blankly, too used to the violence to react anymore. In a back room, DEA agents found tightly wrapped packages, likely heroin. In another, a Mexican officer pulled a man from under a table. Simon recognized him, one of the truckers from the dusty spur. We're close, DuPont said. Simon pointed toward a staircase leading up. Come on. They rushed upstairs, clearing rooms methodically. Simon kicked open one door and found two terrified girls huddled on a mattress. They couldn't have been older than 17. But the next room made his heart stop. Simon, Dupont called from across the hall, her voice tight. I've got them. He ran to her, heart pounding. There, in a dim room lit by a single bulb, sat Deputy Debbie Carr and Deputy Trish Maroro. They were still in uniform, though the fabric was wrinkled, dirt-streaked and torn in places. Trish's badge was missing. Debbie clutched her arm, blood dried on her sleeve. They both looked up with wide, glassy eyes. Trish whispered, "Thank God. We thought no one would find us." Simon stepped forward, lowering his weapon. You're safe now. Medical team is downstairs. Can you walk? They both nodded. Dupont moved to help them to their feet, while Simon radioed in. Federal Command, this is Reyes. We have the two missing officers. Both alive. Medical attention needed. Copy, Reyes. Medics are en route to your position. Debbie winced as Dupont guided her up. They said no one was coming. That you'd never even look for us. They were wrong, Simon said. As they moved down the hall, Simon paused, eyeing a final door at the very end. Something about it, its isolation, the way it was shut tight, drew him. You go, he told Dupont. Get them out, I'll catch up. Dupont hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Simon approached the door quietly, gun raised. He turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open with the barrel of his weapon. Inside sat a single woman, still and silent. She was older, early 40s maybe, with a once beautiful face hardened by years of suffering. Her robe was cheap silk, her makeup smeared. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stared at him. But Simon knew who she was before she even spoke. Deputy Laya Ortega, he said softly. The woman blinked. Her eyes were haunted. I speak English, she said, her voice flat. What are American police doing here? Simon lowered his weapon slightly. I'm Detective Simon Reyes. I've been working your missing person case. You're Laya Ortega. You disappeared 16 years ago with Sheriff Holbrook. A flicker of something, shock, disbelief, passed across her face. You found Ray? Simon nodded slowly. We found his body, in the mountains, in an abandoned outhouse. He'd been buried all this time. Leia looked away. Her voice broke. I knew. I saw them kill him. Simon took a slow step forward, careful not to spook her. I'm here to bring you home. Your mother never stopped looking for you. That cracked her. Tears began to fall, silent, heavy. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. Mama, she whispered, I thought about her every day. But how can I go back? After what I've become, after what I've done. You survived, Simon said. That's what matters. He radioed Dupont. I've got Ortega. She's alive. We're bringing her out. The team helped Laya up, draping a coat around her shoulders. As they descended the stairs, the scene below was still one of controlled chaos. The DEA had seized drugs. The FBI was already questioning patrons, and federal police had several traffickers in custody. As they stepped out into the open air, Simon kept a protective hand on Laya's back. No cameras, no reporters, just flashing lights and the muffled sounds of radio chatter. Outside, medical triage had been set up. Debbie and Trish were already receiving care. Dupont stood nearby, debriefing a field agent. Leia flinched at the lights, the open space. She looked smaller now, like a child lost in a world she no longer recognized. Simon stayed close. Let's get you checked out, and then I'll call your mother. Leia looked at him, broken but grateful. I need her. I need my mom. Simon gave her a small, reassuring nod. You'll see her soon. I promise. As medics led Leia toward the triage station, Simon stepped aside and pulled out his phone. He dialed the number he'd memorized from her file. Marisol Ortega, he asked when the voice answered, trembling. Yes. This is Detective Reyes. I found your daughter. There was silence, then a sob, then the sound of a life changing forever. Simon looked back at the woman he had just pulled from hell. The nightmare was far from over, but one thing was certain. The lost had finally been found. The Okinaga Federal Police Station was modest, but tonight it buzzed like a central command hub. Phones rang constantly, radios buzzed with updates, and a dozen officers shuffled paperwork, spoke in hushed Spanish, and coordinated with US agencies. Inside, 3 rescued women waited to have their lives put back together, and a sprawling criminal empire began to crumble. Simon Reyes stood in the hallway, phone to his ear, speaking with Marisol Ortega, Laya's mother. "Yes, ma'am, she's alive. I spoke to her. She asked for you." A pause, then the unmistakable sound of a mother breaking into tears. "We'll have you across the border within the hour. Border agents are expediting your crossing. We'll be here when you arrive." Simon ended the call and took a deep breath. He'd delivered news no one had expected to hear for 16 years. Now came the part that would haunt them all, piecing together the truth of what had really happened that night in 2009. Inside one of the interview rooms, Leia Ortega sat wrapped in a Red Cross sweatshirt and borrowed jeans. She stared into a cup of coffee as if it contained all the answers. Her eyes, though tired and red, had steadied. She was ready. Simon entered quietly and sat down across from her. Between them, a voice recorder blinked its red light, capturing every word. "I want to start by saying you're not under arrest," Simon said gently. "You're a victim, but we need your statement. We need to understand what happened 16 years ago and what's happened to you since. Can you do that?" Laya nodded. Her voice was low but clear. "Yes, where do you want me to start?" "The beginning," Simon replied. "October 15th, 2009, your relationship with Sheriff Holbrook. The investigation you were conducting." Laya took a shaky breath and began. "Ray and I were investigating rumors about missing girls. 3 young women from Presidio County had vanished that summer. We were hearing whispers about trafficking routes, border activity, connections to truckers moving drugs and people across from Okinaga. Ray thought the Dusty Spur might be connected, said it was a pipeline for everything illegal in this county." She hesitated. "Ray wasn't what those deputies said he was. He was old school, gruff, but he cared. He never laid a finger on me. Never said anything inappropriate. Those accusations, they weren't real." Simon nodded, listening. "That night, we went to the Dusty Spur after our shift. Ray said we had to blend in, ordered 2 beers. I didn't even get halfway through mine before I felt strange, dizzy, slow. Ray looked at me like something was wrong, then grabbed the bar. I knew we were in trouble." "You were drugged," Simon said. "Rohypnol or something similar." "Yes," she said softly. "We stumbled outside, tried to get to our patrol car, but they were waiting. 4 men. I recognized one of them, Raul Espinoza, El Lobo. He ran the trafficking operation through the border." "What happened?" Simon asked, his tone firm but compassionate. "They beat Ray. Even drugged, he fought back. He managed to draw his weapon, but they overwhelmed him, hit him with tire irons until he dropped. Then El Lobo, he shot him, twice, chest, close range." Laya paused, biting her lip, trying not to cry again. "I screamed, tried to reach him, but I couldn't move. I remember them dragging his body into a truck. They threw me in a van. I heard someone say, 'Clean this up before anyone else gets here.' But then headlights appeared. Another patrol car. 'Debbie and Trish,' Simon said grimly. Laya nodded. "At first, I thought they'd save me. I remember hearing Trish say, 'What the hell happened?' But then El Lobo started talking to them. Calm, cold, like it wasn't even a big deal. I heard pieces of it. Extra money. He was harassing you, right? They were making a deal." Simon sat back in his chair, stunned, though the puzzle was already forming. "So they helped cover it up?" "I don't think they were involved beforehand," Leia said. "But once Ray was dead, they were desperate. Debbie was drowning in gambling debt. Trish had a sick kid, leukemia. El Lobo offered them an out. Blame Ray. Say he ran off with me. Say he'd been harassing them and it all came to a head. No one would question it. They helped dispose of the body. They gave them time, told the dispatcher it was a false alarm. El Lobo's men dumped Ray's body in that old outhouse in the Chinat Mountains. Thought it would be pumped out and disappear. Then Debbie and Trish made their official statements about the harassment. It worked. The department buried it. Simon rubbed his eyes. And you? They took me to Ojinaga, burned my ID, kept me sedated for weeks. When I finally came to, I was already in the brothel. They renamed me Lucia. I had no way to prove who I was, no passport, no phone, no voice. Her tone turned bitter. And by then I was too broken to try. Simon was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said, for what they did, for how long it took to find you. Leia looked at him, tears glistening. I stopped hoping years ago, but I never stopped missing my mother or Ray. There was a knock at the door. DuPont entered, holding a folder. We just got confessions, she said. Both of them. Simon took the file and read silently. Debbie Carr had confessed fully. Her gambling debts, her fear, her role in covering up Ray's murder. Trish had written a similar statement, driven by desperation to pay for her son's treatment. They both claimed they believed Ray was dead, but didn't know what happened to Leia after the kidnapping. Simon read aloud from Trish's statement. El Lobo said, "Help us or vanish like the others. We chose to live." Leia nodded slowly, and I was the cost. They were picked up by the cartel tonight, DuPont said. They tried to back out when they saw the news about Holbrook's body. The cartel silenced them, nearly. But we got them, Simon said, and now we build the case. Another knock at the door. This time, it was a Mexican officer. He spoke in Spanish. La madre ha llegado. Marisol Ortega. Simon looked to Leia. Her face went pale. She's here. He stood. She's been waiting 16 years for this moment. Leia swallowed. Can she see me like this? She just wants her daughter back. Simon opened the door and led her through the station. They passed agents, officers, victims, all staring, all knowing her face would soon become a symbol. She looked fragile, but walked with a strange strength. Near the entrance, Marisol Ortega stood clutching a worn purse. Her hair was grey now, her face thinner, but her eyes were the same, sharp, searching. When she saw her daughter, she gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Mija, eres tú? She whispered. Is it really you? Leia stepped forward, her voice breaking. Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm broken. I couldn't protect anyone. I became someone I don't even recognize. But Marisol didn't hesitate. She crossed the room, pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. No, you're my daughter. Nothing that happened was your fault. We start over, together. They held each other, crying quietly in the middle of the fluorescent-lit hallway. Around them, hardened police officers turned away to give them privacy. A few wiped their own eyes. Simon stood nearby, silent. Then Leia looked at him. Detective, thank you for not giving up. You were always Deputy Ortega, Simon said softly. A good cop, a survivor. That's what they'll remember. Outside, the sun began to rise over Ojinaga. The city slowly stirred, unaware that within its shadowy heart, a woman had been reborn. By mid-morning, the Ojinaga police station was overflowing with agents, officers, caseworkers, and witnesses. The Rose of Fire raid had triggered a regional shockwave. DEA agents packed bags of heroin and fentanyl from the brothel's hidden storage. Mexican federal police processed the last of the arrested traffickers. And in a side office, FBI agents reviewed statements, flipping rapidly through documents that linked the local cartel's operations to larger US-Mexico trafficking networks. Simon Reyes hadn't slept, but his focus hadn't wavered. Every step mattered now. He stood at a temporary command center set up near the interview rooms, reviewing lists of known associates of Raul Espinoza, El Lobo. Captain Hernandez, the Mexican federal commander, approached him with a file in hand. El Lobo is slippery, he said. He wasn't at the Rose of Fire. We believe he fled shortly before the raid. He's been using at least 4 different identities, and there are whispers he paid officials in both countries for protection. Any leads on where he went? Simon asked. None we can confirm yet, Hernandez said, but he has family in Juarez. Cartel allies there. If he made it north, finding him will be like finding smoke in the wind. Simon's jaw tightened. He's the center of this entire operation. He killed Holbrook. He buried Leia. He tried to erase the truth. If he slips through the cracks now, no, he won't, Hernandez assured him. We're alerting Interpol and issuing an international warrant. The US Embassy is applying pressure. Even the Mexican president's office has been briefed. This case is making noise. Simon nodded but didn't relax. He'd seen cases like this fall apart before. Bureaucracy had a way of diluting justice until it evaporated. Nearby, DuPont was speaking with an FBI profiler, comparing cartel movement patterns. She glanced at Simon. "Update from Border Patrol," she said. "The freightliner that crossed with Debbie and Trish came through under a false shipping manifest. The company doesn't exist. It's a shell, but its license plate connects to another company in El Paso, linked to human trafficking investigations last year." "So they've been doing this for years," Simon muttered. "Worse," DuPont added, "some of the same names from the El Paso files are showing up in our own Presidio County personnel records." Simon turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean this operation has been under our noses for more than a decade, and some of our own officers may have been turning a blind eye, maybe even helping." Simon stared at her, anger rising. "Are you saying we've got dirty cops in Presidio?" "I'm saying the cartel was too well informed. They knew when to move, where to avoid patrols, and who to bribe. This wasn't just coincidence." Simon exhaled slowly. "Then we need to dig. Every badge, every shift report, every unusual case file from the last 20 years. If someone in our department sold us out, I want their name." Just then, Carlos Mendoza, the bartender from the Dusty Spur, was escorted into the room by 2 agents. He looked less cocky now, more like a man aware his life had hit a crossroads. "I gave them everything I knew," Carlos said quickly. "Names, faces, schedules, even license plate numbers." "And you'll keep giving," DuPont replied, crossing her arms, "because you're not out of this yet." "I want a deal," Carlos said, looking directly at Simon. "Witness protection, reduced charges." I cooperated. Simon stepped closer. "You want a deal, Carlos? Here's the deal. If your information helps us bring down El Lobo, I'll talk to the DA. But if you hold back even one name, one address, one piece of this puzzle, you'll go down as part of the trafficking ring." Carlos swallowed hard. "I'm telling the truth." "Then start with this," DuPont said, tossing a photo on the table. "Recognize him?" Carlos glanced down. His eyes widened. "Yeah, that's Enrique Gama. He runs logistics, helps them cross girls and product back and forth. He was at the bar 3 nights ago." "Is he in Ojinaga?" Simon asked. "No," Carlos said. "He usually moves between Ojinaga and Marfa. Has a storage facility outside town. Could be where they keep the girls before moving them." Simon's heart pounded. Another location, another chance to save someone. "Write down everything you know about that facility, address, layout, who works there." Carlos nodded quickly. "Okay, I will." DuPont leaned in. "And if this checks out, maybe we can talk about a future where you're not rotting in federal prison." Simon turned to Hernandez. "We need to hit that facility today." Hernandez nodded. "We'll mobilize." Within an hour, a new convoy was assembled. FBI, DEA, Mexican Federal Police, and Simon's team. They moved fast, knowing time was their enemy. As they drove north, Laya Ortega sat quietly in the back of a separate transport, her mother beside her. She watched the desert pass in a blur, her mind racing. She was out. She was safe. But part of her still lived in that brothel, in that lie, in the dark. Simon's phone buzzed. A text from DuPont. "Debbie's lawyer just called. She's offering more. Says she has names of deputies and border agents on El Lobo's payroll." Simon stared at the message, then at the horizon. Presidio County wasn't just infected, it had been compromised. But now the walls were coming down. The house of lies, intimidation, and betrayal was collapsing under the weight of the truth. He looked back toward the receding skyline of Ojinaga and thought of Laya's words the night before. "I used to believe people like me didn't get saved." But they did. She did. And now they'd save others too. The convoy moved swiftly under the blistering desert sun toward the outskirts of Marfa, Texas. Simon sat beside Captain Hernandez in the lead vehicle. reviewing the intelligence file on Enrique Gama, the logistics coordinator who ran the suspected storage facility. The Mexican federal police officers, alert and armed, flanked their vehicles. DEA agents coordinated radio frequencies with the FBI, running through raid protocols. DuPont was riding in one of the support vehicles, her fingers flying over a tablet, updating the team with real-time intelligence from informants and surveillance. Simon's mind churned. Every piece of the puzzle they uncovered so far pointed to one unsettling truth. This operation wasn't just the work of a few cartel members. It was an institutional cancer, festering in the shadows of two countries' law enforcement agencies. The storage facility was an old, weather-beaten warehouse nestled in a scrubby field outside Marfa. Satellite imagery showed faded lettering on the rusting corrugated metal walls, an abandoned logistics company long forgotten by legitimate business. Simon's team arrived minutes before the raid, cameras capturing every angle, agents suited up, weapons loaded, body cams activated. The plan was precise: hit hard, hit fast, catch everyone inside off guard. DuPont whispered into her radio, "Team Alpha, entry in 5, watch for hostiles, confirm presence of human trafficking victims." Simon checked his watch. "All units ready, let's bring them home." The main doors crashed open and the team flooded inside. The warehouse smelled of dust, mold, and decay. Rows of metal shelves held crates stamped with false shipping labels. In one corner, Simon spotted several women huddled together, exhausted, frightened, some bruised. "Medical team here," DuPont called as paramedics rushed to help the victims. Simon focused on the men. Several cartel members scrambled, raising weapons, but the agents overwhelmed them swiftly. Enrique Gama was caught trying to flee through a back exit, subdued and cuffed. As the suspects were loaded into vehicles, Simon found evidence, documents, ledgers, and photos hidden inside crates. Names of corrupt officers, payment ledgers, routes for illegal crossings. "Take photos, bag everything. This is our smoking gun," Simon said. Back at the command post, agents sifted through the material, eyes wide with shock. DuPont read aloud, "Payments to officers in Presidio County, Border Patrol agents, and even a few from the Sheriff's Department. One entry dated just 6 months ago shows a payment to Deputy Collins." Simon's heart sank. He knew Deputy Collins, one of the most trusted officers on the force. "How deep does this go?" Simon muttered. The interrogations began. Enrique Gama refused to talk at first, but the overwhelming evidence against him was enough to break the silence. "They paid us to look the other way," he spat bitterly, "to move the trucks, to silence the deputies who got too curious. El Lobo's reach is long. You don't cross him." Simon exchanged a glance with Hernandez. "This is bigger than we thought," Hernandez said grimly, "and we're just scratching the surface." Days of interviews, raids, and arrests followed. Across Presidio County and Ojinaga, law enforcement agencies collaborated to dismantle the trafficking network. Several officers were suspended, some arrested on corruption charges. It was a painful but necessary purge. Meanwhile, Simon focused on the victims: Debbie, Trish, Leia, and dozens of others rescued from the shadows. Medical teams worked tirelessly, offering care, counseling, and hope. One afternoon, Simon sat with Leia and her mother, Marisol, in a quiet room at the safe house. Leia was visibly stronger, but the weight of years haunted her eyes. "Do you ever think you'll feel normal again?" Simon asked softly. Leia looked out the window. "Normal is a strange word now, but maybe someday I'll find peace." Marisol reached for her daughter's hand. "We'll find it together." Simon nodded. Despite the darkness they'd faced, moments like these reminded him why the fight mattered. Back at the sheriff's office, Simon received a call from Deputy Collins. His voice was shaky, guilt-ridden. "I didn't know what I was getting into." "I'm ready to cooperate," Collins said. Simon replied, "It's never too late to do the right thing. We'll start when you get here." The unraveling continued, each new revelation peeling back more layers of betrayal and courage. As the sun set over Presidio County, Simon stood on the steps of the courthouse. Cameras flashed, reporters gathered. The case was now public, a beacon of hope and warning. He thought back to the beginning, the missing deputies, the abandoned outhouse, the lies buried for 16 years. Truth had finally broken free, and justice was on its way. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The Presidio County Courthouse had rarely seen such a spectacle. Reporters, advocates, families, and officials packed into every available seat. The trial of El Lobo and his cartel associates was about to begin. Simon Reyes sat quietly in the back, his notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the defendants. Years of investigation had led to this moment. The men sitting before the judge had been the architects of a decades-long nightmare. Debbie Carr, Trish Maroro, and Laya Ortega sat nearby, flanked by counselors and security. Each woman's presence in the courtroom was a testament to survival, to courage, and to the enduring fight against the darkness they'd endured. The prosecutor stood and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear the truth about how a trusted sheriff was murdered, how deputies were silenced, and how innocent lives were trapped in the cruel grip of a trafficking network stretching across 2 nations." The courtroom fell silent. Simon's mind drifted back to the earliest days of the case. The discovery of Sheriff Holbrook's body, the missing deputies, and the unraveling of a corrupt web that had ensnared so many. As testimony began, the first witnesses recounted the events of that fateful night. The drugging of officers, the brutal assault, the betrayal from within. Debbie took the stand, her voice steady but raw. "I never wanted this life. I was scared, desperate. They promised protection, money. I was weak, but I'm here to make things right." Trish followed, telling of the impossible choices she'd faced, the bills piling up, the threats, and the darkness that swallowed her whole. Laya's testimony was the most powerful. Her voice, though still tinged with pain, carried the strength of a woman reclaiming her story. "I was a deputy. I believed in justice. But that belief was shattered. The men who killed Sheriff Holbrook silenced me too. For 16 years, I lived in fear and shame. But I am not broken anymore." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of sympathy and disbelief. Simon watched the faces of the defendants, some cold, some remorseful, others defiant. He knew the truth was heavy, but justice demanded it be heard. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed, eager for every detail. Simon fielded questions carefully. "How did you unravel such a complex case?" "It took years, collaboration between agencies, and the bravery of survivors," Simon replied. "But the key was never giving up." The trial dragged on for weeks, each day bringing new revelations, hidden payments, secret meetings, and the mechanisms of fear that kept the cartel's grip tight. One day, Simon was called to the stand to testify about the investigation. He described the discovery of the outhouse, the painstaking forensic work, and the coordinated raids that finally tore the operation apart. The courtroom listened intently as Simon outlined the systemic corruption, a betrayal of public trust by those sworn to protect. The defense tried to discredit witnesses, paint the victims as unreliable, and sow doubt. But the overwhelming evidence was clear. Finally, after weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations. In the waiting room, Simon sat with the victims, offering quiet words of support. Debbie squeezed his hand. "Thank you for believing in us." Trish nodded, tears glistening, "For not giving up." Laya, her gaze steady, added, "For finding us when everyone else had forgotten." The verdict came late one evening. The judge read it aloud, guilty on all counts. Relief and justice mingled in the courtroom air. The men who had caused so much pain would pay for their crimes. But for Simon, the work was far from over. He returned to Presidio, visiting the families of those lost, the girls who had vanished, the officers betrayed. In one quiet moment, he stood by Sheriff Holbrook's grave, placing a single white lily on the freshly turned earth. "Your name will be cleared," he whispered, "and we'll keep fighting for the lost." As the sun set behind the mountains, Simon looked ahead. The battle against trafficking was ongoing, but tonight was a victory, a beacon of hope shining through years of darkness. The town of Presidio was slowly waking from a long, uneasy slumber. For 16 years, whispers of fear, suspicion, and lost hope had hung over its dusty streets like a thick fog. Now, after the trial, there was a tentative sense of relief, but the wounds ran deep. Simon Reyes sat in the sheriff's office, the morning light filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The walls held memories, old wanted posters, faded photographs, photographs and plaques honoring officers long gone. It felt different now, quieter but heavier, as if the ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest. The phone on his desk rang. Simon picked up. "Detective Reyes, this is Marisol Ortega." The voice on the line was steady but gentle. "I wanted to thank you for bringing my daughter home." Simon's throat tightened. "Mrs. Ortega, it was an honor. Laya is incredibly strong." "She is," Marisol said, a faint smile in her voice. "And so are you. I know this isn't over, but it feels like the beginning of healing." Simon nodded to himself. "It is. And we'll be here every step of the way." Over the following weeks, the community rallied. Support groups formed for survivors. Local law enforcement worked closely with social services to provide counseling and protection for those still recovering. Laya Ortega, once lost in the shadows, was becoming a symbol of resilience. She spoke publicly about her ordeal, urging others to come forward and fight the silence. At a small gathering in the town hall, she addressed a crowd of neighbors, officers, and advocates. "I was broken," she admitted, voice steady but emotional. "But I am not alone. None of us are. Together, we can build a future where no one suffers in silence." Debbie and Trish, both facing legal consequences, had begun the slow process of redemption. They were cooperating fully, determined to make amends and help dismantle the cartel's remnants. Simon continued his work tirelessly, coordinating with federal agencies to monitor ongoing trafficking activity along the border. The case had opened eyes and strengthened bonds between communities on both sides. One afternoon, Simon visited the dusty spur, now closed indefinitely. The bar's faded sign creaked in the wind, a reminder of the past darkness that had once thrived there. He stood outside, thinking about the lives affected, the young women lost, the officers betrayed, the families shattered, but also about hope, the hope that even in the darkest places, light could break through. As he walked back to his car, Simon felt the weight of the past, but also a renewed sense of purpose. "This town deserves better," he whispered, "and I'll fight to give it to them." The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, it was a road that led to justice, healing, and new beginnings. The months after the raid and rescue were a whirlwind of activity. The wheels of justice, slow but relentless, began turning with a renewed vigor. Simon Reyes and his team were at the heart of it, gathering testimonies, piecing together evidence, and coordinating with prosecutors on both sides of the border. The arrest warrants for Raul Espinoza, known as El Lobo, and his cartel associates were issued. The international operation required patience and precision. At the courthouse in Presidio, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Victims, families, law enforcement officers, and community members gathered for the first major hearing. Laya Ortega attended, her presence a powerful symbol of survival and courage. She sat with her mother, Marisol, who held her hand tightly. The courtroom buzzed quietly as the judge called the session to order. Simon sat at the prosecution's table, reviewing notes. The defense attorneys were known for their skill, and the cartel's resources were formidable. But this time, the truth was backed by undeniable evidence and multiple eyewitness accounts. The first witnesses took the stand, survivors rescued from the brothel, former cartel insiders turned state witnesses, and officers who had worked alongside the victims. Their stories painted a picture of horror, corruption, and betrayal, but also resilience and hope. Outside the courthouse, a growing crowd of supporters gathered, some holding signs demanding justice for the lost deputies and victims. The media coverage brought national attention to the case, shining a light on human trafficking and law enforcement corruption that had long been hidden. Simon gave interviews, speaking not only as a detective, but as a man committed to change. "We're here to send a message," he said firmly. "No more silence, no more hiding. This ends now." The prosecution faced many challenges: threats, intimidation, and attempts to discredit witnesses. But the strength of the survivors and the support of the community kept the momentum alive. Debbie Carr and Trish Mororo, once pawns in the cartel's game, testified against their former captors, revealing how they had been manipulated and coerced. Their cooperation, though controversial, helped build the case. As the trial progressed, Simon found himself reflecting on the journey. From the discovery of Holbrook's body in that forgotten outhouse to the rescue of Leia and others, it had been a path marked by pain, but also by the unyielding pursuit of justice. He made regular visits to Leia and her mother, supporting their recovery and staying updated on the trial's progress. One evening, as he left their safe house, Leia stopped him. "Detective," she said softly, "thank you for never giving up on me." Simon smiled gently. "You never should have been forgotten." The trial's climax came when El Lobo was brought into the courtroom. His cold, unrepentant gaze swept over the room, but the faces of those he had hurt, those who had survived, told a different story, one of strength and justice. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Relief and tears filled the courtroom as the sentence was read. Years in prison with no possibility of parole. The cartel's network was dismantled, its leaders brought to justice. The impact of the case rippled beyond Presidio and Ojinaga. Law enforcement agencies strengthened cooperation, and new initiatives to combat trafficking were launched. Simon Reyes stood outside the courthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the light seemed brighter. A town scarred but healing, a community united, a future reclaimed. The dawn light broke softly over Presidio as the first rays filtered through the window of the courthouse conference room. Simon Reyes sat quietly, reflecting on the long road traveled, the unsolved mysteries, the silent years, and finally the truth uncovered. Across from him, Leia Ortega and her mother, Marisol, shared a moment of calm. The fear and pain of the past were still there, but so was hope. Healing was beginning. Simon looked over the file of the case, now nearly closed, but forever etched in the history of the town. The investigation had brought to light a corruption so deep it shook the foundations of the local law enforcement and government. But it had also brought to light resilience, courage, and the power of never giving up. The community of Presidio was changing. Awareness about human trafficking had grown exponentially. Law enforcement training improved, and outreach programs to support victims were being developed. Leia was working with advocacy groups, determined to make sure others wouldn't suffer as she had. Marisol helped organize local support for families affected by trafficking. Simon's phone buzzed. A message from the district attorney. "Case closed. Thanks for your dedication. You've made a difference." He smiled softly, but knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. Later that afternoon, Simon drove out to the quiet spot where Sheriff Holbrook's body had been found. The old outhouse in the Chinati Mountains. The wind whispered through the dry brush, carrying memories. He knelt by the weathered wood, placing a small stone in silent respect for the man who had paid the ultimate price. Simon thought about the deputies who had vanished that night, about the lives lost and saved, about the shadows that had finally been pulled back. He stood and looked to the horizon, a vast expanse of desert and sky, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could be found. Back in town, a memorial was being planned, a statue to honor those lost and to celebrate those who had survived. Simon hoped it would remind everyone of the price of silence and the power of truth. As the sun set on Presidio, Simon felt a quiet resolve. There would always be darkness, but there would always be those who fought to bring it into the light. The lost had been found, and the story, their story, would never be forgotten.